What's up, everybody? Welcome to the Scratch Agency podcast, hosted by Scratch Agents for Scratch Agents. This episode is brought to you by Virtual Intelligence, your premier partner for client-facing and back-office virtual employees. My name is Stephen Turnbull, founder of T5 Insurance Services in Clinton, New York, and I am joined by the co-host today, the one and only, you already know, hold your applause, Mr. Sean Fitzgerald, founder of Sound Harbor Insurance in Long Island, New York. Mr. Fitzgerald, how are we doing today?
Beautiful day. Excited to talk about Osama, about the claims process. It's something I definitely need to refine a little bit, so I'm pumped to get into that conversation. Getting ready for my company's annual summit this Saturday, so pumped to do that. Last year we did it at like a steakhouse locally, and now this year we're going to go down to Jersey and have a good time and stay overnight and business plan and have a nice dinner and just take full advantage of doing it offsite. So I'm pumped about that.
Just send me the address. I'll be there.
Yes,
no
sir.
problem. I appreciate the invite. Everyone, we're jumping right into it as we usually do. Osama is back on the show. Osama is the founder and owner of Insurit Agency, and he shared our story and his story rather with us on episode 78. So please reference that because we're not going to get into the specifics of all that today. We want to talk about claims. We want to talk about his history with claims and how in his new agency he's been able to build out that process. But before we do that, Osama, how are you today? Thanks again for joining us.
Doing well. Thank you for having me on. It's always a good time talking shop, so I love it.
Let's just start with the very brief bio again for those that haven't gone back to 78 yet. Just learning about your history in insurance, and then you know the scratch story, and then we'll get into the claim stuff we want to talk about.
Yeah, absolutely. So I started in the insurance industry about 10 years ago, and I cut my teeth in claims specifically. Did auto, did a little bit of rec products, moved up into the leadership side. And so before I opened my agency, everything that led me up to it was the entire claim process, is seeing how the back end of insurance works. A little light bulb kind of went off in my head to say, I can do this, and I think I've got a leg up, especially understanding how claims work, because that's the biggest piece. That's the piece that people use insurance for. That's the reason why everybody's got insurance. So
Yeah, I think you explained it perfectly with it being a leg up, because when people look to get in this industry, I think that's like the last step that they realize, oh, I've got to learn this, right? Like you can learn sales, like you can learn like, you know, whatever you came from a direct carrier to start your agency, whatever it is. But it's such a unique advantage that you have. So why don't you just start with us of like the view of drawing out that claims process when you started the agency, so we can dive into that a little bit deeper.
yeah. Well, I think we have to take a step back first to really understand and put yourself in that position. I think we as agents, where we go wrong is we do all these additional things, these automations, uh, things that we tell ourselves make it easy for the client, but in reality, they don't. And unless you've had a claim and you know what that process feels like, and you know the stress and you know the emotions and everything that it's taken its toll on, you don't know, right? So I think it's taking a step back and understanding and putting yourself in the client's position and then dissecting the process, right? And, just as a caveat here, every situation is going to be a little bit different. But in order to take something that's difficult or that may seem difficult or that may seem complicated, break it down to the core issues. And when you look at claims, what are the core issues? They're slow, they're complex, they're stressful, and they're like uncharted territories. People don't know what they don't know. And that's how I look at it, especially from the first standpoint of laying out your processes or what your procedures look like to be able to address that with your clients. And here's how I look at it. When you're setting up your claims process, and this is the benefit for our agency. The first is the data validation. We always work to make sure that we have all the correct information with our clients, right? And sometimes we don't get that information all up front. If there's ever a claim, part of your process should be a data validation. What's the best email for you? What's the best phone number for you? Hey, let's get your spouse's information as well. Because it didn't look like that we have either the correct information or we have outdated information or we never had it in the first place, right? So right there and then, you're making your book a lot better. The second piece is it's a compliance and a documentation piece of it.
Yeah.
If if you ever run, and I'm not saying like documentation from the aspect of this is what happened in the claim, this is what we talked about. It's going over the coverages with the client either after the fact or a follow-up after the claim is filed, just to say, hey, here's the conversation we had about your coverages, your deductibles. Well, now all of a sudden, there's no ifs and or buts.
Yeah.
Something happens again, you know what your deductibles are, you know what your coverage is.
Sure.
And then I've got two more. Human connection, right? Claims are stressful. Like we use this as an additional touch point to actively listen to the people, check in on their well-being. Like, hey, I don't care about this car. How's your family? How's your kids? Are you okay? It sounds like you're stressed. Like these are the things that make a difference.
Be a human. Yeah.
Yeah.
You hit it right on the
Right.
head.
And then last but not least, like it's a cross-sell opportunity. If
Yeah.
if somebody doesn't have the specific coverage, if somebody doesn't have, towing roadside rental, whatever it may be, this gives us an opportunity to review their policy. And then after, a day or two, we follow up with the client and we sell based on the emotion. Hey, I couldn't help but realize that you didn't have this specific coverage. If you're ever in that situation again, don't you think this might be a good thing to have? Right.
Hmm.
And because sometimes people make decisions based on emotion. When they initially buy policies, regardless of what you think, sometimes they think the end in mind, which is, hey, how is this going to affect me? How is this going to affect my price? But until that situation arises where I've got a claim, I don't have a rental coverage, I don't have roadside, or I don't have glass, whatever it may be, right? That's when it comes in, and then they can make a better decision right there and then.
That's so good, Osama. Can you talk about like the initial conversation? Somebody calls in, they have a claim, just so we can give some like actionable steps for these other agents. Like somebody calls in, they have a claim. Like, what's that first conversation look like for your team?
Well, Sean, can I interject for a second here? Osama's been very giving in the fact that he's going to share with the listeners his exact process. Before we jump into that, if you don't mind, there was a conversation I want you just to start with before we get into the process, and a mastermind call that Sean and I are in. Someone brought in like, hey, I feel like I need to be more involved in claims. And somebody else said, well, you got to be careful how involved you are in claims because we are the insurance agent. We are the insurance company agency. We are not the claims adjuster, right? So is this going to be covered? How is this going to affect it? All of that. Tell us when we're setting up our claims process, how many touch points we have before we get into that actual claims process. Where do we balance the line in your experience of being an adjuster of how much involved we should be in that process?
There's a common misconception, and I've seen this lately, right? Like on some of the Facebook groups. And to your point, Stephen, this exact question was, hey, what are people's processes when calling in a claim for a client? And everybody's reaction was, don't do that. It's not your job. Tell the client it's their duty. I will push back on that 100%. You can't tell me when a client goes through the worst thing that they've gone through, you're turning around and you're telling them I can't do it. Who says we can't do it? The contract? Contract doesn't say that. The contract just says they have to report the claim. Now, I'm not asking people to be adjusters. All I'm saying, and this is the breaking out phase, right? The first step that I told you, when you lay out your entire decision tree, your flow chart, You have to dissect it. Is this a complex claim? Is this a simple coverage claim? Right? Like if it's a simple rear ending, if it's a simple car accident, right? That's an easy path to follow. You never make the decision on whether this is covered or this is not covered. The issue is you want to set expectations with a client. You want to walk them through it. Because here's what happens. When a client calls in a claim, they're not talking to an adjuster. They're talking to a customer service rep. That customer service rep is not an adjuster. They can't tell them and advise them anything, but the client doesn't know that if you don't tell them that. So all of a sudden, they spent 20 to 30 minutes explaining the entire situation, only to find out at the end of it, you've got to do it all over again with the actual adjuster on a recorded line and go through everything. That's frustrating, right? So that initial conversation and towing the line between, advising the client on their coverage, it's just setting them up to succeed. It's just making sure that they understand this is what your coverages are. This is what your deductible is.
Yeah, discussing any policy weaknesses they may have.
Exactly. Right. And it basically gets out in front of it. I think a lot of people don't want to have that conversation. And it's either because they're not confident in the policy that they sold, or they just don't want to bring about bad news.
Or they're lazy. I'll just say it.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And I mean, Sean, 100%. And I always, Sean, I apologize for interrupting you about the process, but I wanted to preface that because it was a very interesting discussion that we had in our group of like, where do we draw the line of how much is too much, how much is too little? But I always said, to your point, you drew it out. You drew it out perfect. Do you want them to talk to you about the initial information, or do you want them to talk to just a representative that's just going to not answer their questions, get the data in and all of that, and then talk to the adjuster? And I tell people all the time, like, what do we sell the policies for when these things happen, right? And like, this is our time to shine, whether it be our time as the agency or our time as the company. And we're going to get into some of the amazing things like the introduction to the adjuster and all those things that Osama has shared with us and will share with everybody. But to your point, Sean, exactly. Like, are you being lazy? And on the back end, what type of experience is that going to provide for your clients?
Yeah. And at the same time, you can't shine if you're not prepared for the conversation. So if you don't have a process built around it, you're never going to win that conversation. No,
it's a white glove approach, and that's how I look at it. If we're not doing this one little thing, that this is what we promise our clients. Everybody says we promise to be there in need for you, right? Like Dr. Billy Williams always says, like, hey, did you offer the best coverages to keep the client's lifestyle the same, right? If we can't simply do that to make the process easy for them, then you're just opening the door for them to leave.
Yep.
So, and let me give an analogy, right? So imagine it's the middle of the night. Your child is sick. He's throwing up. You're stressed. You're tired. You just want to make things better. You go to the store to grab some medicine. When you walk in, the greeter just says, "Oh, hey, yeah, what you need is over on that aisle. It's in that department. When you go there, somebody will help you out."
Yes.
It's going to leave you frustrated. You're going to be overwhelmed. You just want things to go back to normal. Now imagine if the greeter had listened to you, walked you directly to your aisle, walked you to the pharmacist, helped you get what you need. That's the difference. That's the difference between a process where you hand it off and just let them figure it out, and a white glove approach.
So good.
Yeah, that's good.
It's so good.
All right, let's get into that. Let's get into that initial conversation. So they call, they have a claim.
Yep.
What does that initial conversation look like for your team?
The first thing is, one, we want to check up on the client. Are you okay? Right? There's always a sense of, and especially if it's an at-fault accident, and I keep on reverting to auto accidents just because this is the stuff that happens a lot, right? But like, there's always this sense of shame if you're in a fault accident. And unless you've ever been in one, you don't know what that's like. Like, you think to yourself, how could I be so dumb? So like, the first thing that we want to do is empathetically listen to them and just tell them, like, hey, this is why you have insurance. Right? The second thing is we immediately go to their coverages to find out what they are. Do they have coverage for this? This is an auto accident. Cool, you have comp, you have collision. Here's what your deductibles are. Right? At that point, we give the client, like, and this is all based on the flow chart or the decision tree. You basically figure it out. Right? Is this an emergency? Or is this not an emergency? Is the client calling you from the middle of the road because they had just gotten in an accident and they're freaking out and they don't know what to do? Or is this something that happened and they're okay and it's just a day later or a couple hours later? Right? And there's two different approaches, right? So if you've got somebody that's right there and then at the scene of an accident, like, obviously we let them know to, you know, do their duties. Call the police. Call the police no matter what. Get the police to go out there just so that way there's some sort of record. Take pictures of your car and the other person's car, if that's important. Make sure everybody's okay. And then at that point, we gather all of the details from them. And we say, listen, here's what we can do. And we'll give them an option. We can file it on your behalf, or you can file it. There's only two options. You go with us, you use our agency app, and you set the clear expectations. Hey, this app doesn't actually file the claim for you. This app gives us all of the information so that way we can file it for you. And there's no running around trying to get all this data, trying to get this information or this or that, right? We want to have a comprehensive overview of everything that happened and the details. So that way, when we connect you with your adjuster, they can get straight to the point and help you out. Right? Once we have that detail, that's when we file the claim. Either we file the claim or we wait for the client to file a claim. Either way, we are going to get a claim number and we're going to get an adjuster's information. If it's a day later, that's still okay. That doesn't change anything in terms of processes, because once we have a claim number, once we have an adjuster, we've got a template where we reach out to the adjuster, we CC the client, and we say, hey, I want to introduce you to our client. They recently just filed a claim. Here's this attached PDF. We've already uploaded it, but just so that way you have it. Right? Client knows their coverages. The client knows their deductibles, right? It gets rid of a lot of the stuff that has to happen in the claim process anyway. Right? Is it taking a little bit more time from you? Yeah, but it's not anything crazy. You already know what their deductibles are. You already know what their coverages are. Yeah. Now the adjuster, it's one less thing that they've got to worry about. Like, oh, I've got to have a tough conversation. Because that was one of the things as an adjuster. Is like being the middle guy between the agent and the client and trying to tell them, oh, you actually have $1,000 deductible instead of $5. Right? People have claimnesia, right? They don't remember what their deductibles are. But if we set all of that stuff up front, then it's just easier.
Yeah. Osama, do you ever mention to the client when it's not something that's liability related? Like, I would say car accidents, I wouldn't even bring this up. But if it was like a water damage claim or maybe like a property damage related claim, of the repercussions of filing a claim, right? Is that something you guys put in your process? Because I never advise them not to put in a claim, but I just tell them, hey, this is your deductible. This is what can happen at renewal, whether it's a non-renewal or rate increase or whatever the case is. So I'm just curious how you guys handle that.
Yeah, absolutely. And we do. That's actually one of the decision trees that we go off of. And so immediately when you talk to a client, they are either sure that they want to file a claim or they're unsure / they don't know. right? And so what we tell the client, especially if they're unsure, they don't know, right? We're upfront with them. Listen, we're not claims adjusters. I don't know if this is covered or not, but if it's one of those scenarios where we know and the client's still unsure, we let them know, hey, here's the process. Let us determine to see if it's worth filing claim for or not. Right?
Yeah.
And what we do is we don't determine whether it is or not. It gives us all the information. We look at it, we review it, and doing this for so long, you kind of have an idea and an eye for this is approximately going to be this much. And so what we tell the client is straight up, hey, before we file this claim, why not get some proposals? Why not get some proposals from a couple of contractors? See what it's worth, right? Because
Yep.
ultimately, in the end, they've got to make that decision. If $5,000 is going to break the bank for you, and you won't be able to make it work, then okay, like file a claim.
Yeah.
But if you look at it and it's below your threshold, your tolerance, and you've gotten all these quotes from these three different people, or two different people, whatever it may be, then maybe that's a decision you say, hey, I'm just going to eat it and I'll just take it.
Gotcha. So Osama, now talk to us about how you set that expectation with the client. So let's say they go with you, they want you to file the claim, which I think, let's
Yep.
say 90+% of the time, that's probably going to happen. You file the claim. Well, I'm sorry. Before you hang up, what's the expectation you set with the client? Do you say, hey, an adjuster's going to reach out to you in the next 24 hours? If they
Yeah.
don't reach out to us, like, how do you handle that?
It's, hey, 24 to 48 hours.
Yep.
We give them more time than anything. 24 to 48 hours, somebody will reach out to you.
Set the
And if they
expectation, exceed the expectation.
exactly. And if they don't reach out to us or email the adjuster and figure out a date and a time you can talk to them and CC me on it. I'm not getting involved. I'm not doing anything. But just having me on the chain itself, on the original chain, keeps the ball rolling a little bit. The biggest disconnect is you've got adjusters that are working 100+ claims in their workload.
Mhm.
And it's basically a game of phone tag and trying to connect with somebody.
Mm-hmm.
I wish there was an easier way in the claims process where you kind of like a Calendly, right? Like schedule your time with your adjuster. That's what they need to do. That's
That's
the
$1 million
next.
idea. All carriers that are listening, write that down and implement it right now. What a great
Because
idea. Really.
you're trying to connect with so many different people and you're trying to multitask. But if you know at this date, at this time, that's who you're going to speak with, then it's set.
Yeah.
And I'll just piggyback off of that. When we send the email introducing the adjuster to the client, within the same day, we have always gotten an email back. We have always gotten an email back. Hey, we can't wait to work with this person. Have them call me at this time or at this number. It just shows we saw this email, right? So not only are they getting pinged in multiple different ways, right? You've got an email coming in that says this claim. On their own system, they've got another, notification that says a new claim came in, right? And if the majority of the work is taken off of the adjuster in terms of going over the coverages and figuring out all these details, then that's one claim they can get done and move on to the next.
Mm-hmm.
Yep. Steven, I want to ask you about, because I know you are like the king of send out cards. And I know you've implemented send out cards in the claims process.
Yeah.
And this kind of ties into like that initial conversation, filing the claim. And then I assume right once you file the claim, you're probably already in send out cards doing something thoughtful.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that'd just be cool for you to share for like a minute and then talk about like any stories that you have where someone like was stoked that they got the card or happy about it.
Well, it's funny because I had a claim about how long have we been recording? 20 minutes, about 25 minutes ago. Literally, Sean was yelling at me because I was late logging on, but I had a claim that I was on the phone with somebody. And Osama, thank you for making me feel a little bit better about myself over here, because the way you just walked through the steps was how I walked through. Large tree branch fell on the car in the park and on their driveway, windows damaged, whole hood is damaged. Had the same conversation. How much is this going to raise my rate? Should I put it through? What would you do? And walk through those things of like, here's what your insurance is for. This is your deductible. It's up to you if you want to get a proposal for what that's going to look like to fix it, or we can file the claim, and this is that. So thanks for helping my ego there a little bit, Osama. But Sean, to your point, I always have to preface this like I always do with I stole this from Jeremy Powers, because he is the king of send out cards that help me have so much success with it. But if it's a claim that's basically not a glass claim, so if it's a claim where it's a couple $1,000s, or it was a bad experience or a car accident, it's like something like this tree. This guy went to walk his dog this morning and found a tree on his car. Not the ideal way to start your day. We send claims suck, but brownies don't card. And it just says, we know this is not something you want to go through. We can't go back and remove the tree from your car. We can't go back and change what happened. Claims suck. We're here to help you, but brownies don't. Here's 2 brownies. I think I've gotten somebody that sent back something every single time. And just because that's a different experience. And to the point that we go back to where we started, like that's the experience that they're going to think. And maybe Mary Jane that's at the company takes 3 days to reach out to them when it should have been 24 hours. But then they get this little brownie packet from their agency and they're like, okay, well, at least this is being taken care of. I just love the conversation, because what Osama has helped us drawn out so far, excuse me, is those touch points, right? And when you have something like a claim, like he talked about, that not everybody goes through all the time like we do every single day, right? It's a big thing that's happened in their life. They don't know what's going to happen. This is my brand new car, whatever it is. Those touch point are what help relieve it, which help lowers the stress level a little bit, that like we've taken care of it. And that's just one thing that we've implemented that's had a great, return.
I mean, you're turning a negative experience into a positive one. And I think Osama touched on it earlier, right? It's like, even in the game of selling, it's all about a transfer of emotion. So if you can transfer your positive energy onto this other person and turn a terrible experience into maybe a not so terrible experience, or as close to positive as possible. Osama mentioned cross-selling earlier, like doing those little things like the brownies, helping them file the claim, all that stuff. When you try to sell them life insurance 6 months down the road or whatever the case is, like that's just going to help your case,
Well, go back to what he said in the beginning. Like Osama, you said it's a human-human interaction.
Yeah.
How would you want to be, when you're drawing this process out, how would you want this to be handled? Like, immediately I thought of every Sunday I find myself at Lowe's and I go there and I can't find a single person with a red apron on to help me find the bolt that I'm trying to find, right? And to your point, like they're like, oh, go down to aisle 15, have a good day. And here I am looking for aisle 15 and I'm down in 45 and I can't see 15 from where I'm at, and I'm frustrated.
You gotta get that. You gotta get the Lowe's app.
I know. But that analogy, like it's spot on. This is our time to shine. They're going through something they don't want to go through. This is what we sold them, the product that we sell for. And I think it's spot on. So Osama, I want to get into a different point about this, but while we have enough time, but just so finish out that process. So we introduce the adjuster, we make that introduction, so that helps the adjuster. It helps, again, that's another touch point we talked about, right? Yep. From there, once that claim is handled, going back to trailing that gray line of how much do we get involved, how much do we not, how do you operate that?
So we are always upfront with the client, especially when it comes to things that we don't know whether they might be covered or they might not be covered. This goes along the same lines of the expectations of setting all of these things. We explain to the client, hey, here's what it is. And here's your adjuster's job. So we explain to them what their adjuster's job is, right? An adjuster's job is strictly factual. We interpret everything according to the contract that your policy says. And in order for the client to better understand that, we explain to them, sometimes you have to go a little bit out of your way to provide the support and the information that they need on their end to be able to pass it through, right? So, like, as an adjuster, you're reporting to a supervisor. If you've got to make a coverage decision, if you've got to make a payment on this much amount, but you're constantly butting heads with the client, that's where bad situations occur. This is where bad claims happens all the time, because this person is mad at this person. Nobody's coming into an agreement. And so we tell the client up front, like, hey, listen, their job is to interpret this contract according to the legal terms. In order for us to help our case out, and if this is how you see it, then let's provide all of the details and the support that we can. This might mean taking additional photos. This might mean having an additional person come. This might mean working with a contractor or a company that plays nice. Because you can get any contractor off the street, and if they're butting heads with your adjuster, it's not going to go well.
Yeah. Osama, this just made me think of this. When do you think is a good time to bring in an outside adjuster? Because, you hear about these conversations about, oh, maybe you should look at a public adjuster because they can fight to get you more money. Like, when do you usually see where that makes sense?
That's a tough one, because I almost see it as a last case scenario. There's always ways to get it resolved without having to bring in the third party. And the reason being is, do they have your best interest? That's what I question. And some do, some don't. I can't
Yeah.
speak for everyone, but
Correct.
I look at it as a last case scenario where, hey, there is no meeting of the minds at all in this case. And at that point, we'll tell the client, like, here's your options. And there's ultimately, if you disagree on this, like in your personal auto policies, right? There's always going to be a third party arbitrator. Like, there's no need for you to bring a public adjuster. Just know that there's this provision in your policy that says, if we both don't agree, we're going to send it to a third party umpire and they make the decision. Are you comfortable with that? Do you want to dig your feet in, and do you think you can get something out of it? If that's the case, then ultimately, yeah, go that route. Otherwise, I always tell my clients, get with me and we'll move it up the chain until we can get it figured out. Because there's always going to be a resolution, and it's going to be a whole lot faster than going the route of public adjuster. Once again, it's not saying public adjusters are bad. They're not. Not all of them are bad. Some of them might.
Can we?
But
I want to pause there and just think of what we talked about in the beginning of. Think of these two experiences. What Osama just said of, if it gets to this point, get with me. We'll have a discussion. We'll see if I can bring it any further up the chain. We'll see if I can help have this conversation. Versus, file the claim directly to the company. Sorry to hear you had a bad day. Take care. Which one? I mean, it's so obvious to even ask the question, but like, which one is not going to leave when there's a hard market and a 30% increase, right? Like, which one is going to refer you business? Which one is going to be your cheerleader, right? Like, when it comes to getting that claims resolved, and Aunt Mary just had a claim and she's with X company, can't get a hold of their 1-800 number. Like, what? Like, it goes back to the experience that we're providing. And I think that's a huge point. Osama, I want to pivot real quick if we can. Same conversation, but with catastrophic losses. And I want to tell a quick story and put myself in the seat just for a second. About 4 years ago, I've been in the industry for coming up 9 years. Wow, it makes me feel a little old. Okay. About 4 years ago, I had my first complete house fire. First and only. And I think if you talk to a lot of agents, some have never experienced it. Right? It's obviously what we do when we set up that contract, when we talk about policy weaknesses, when we talk about gaps in coverage with clients. We prepare for that. We prepare for the worst. If this happens, we want to make sure you're taken care of to the best of our ability. But I'll tell you, it was one of the scariest nights that I can remember in my career, because it was a Friday night. I'll never forget it. We were going to a friend's house. I get a call at like 6:30. The client's calling me. My house is completely burning on fire, and I can hear like the fire department in the background. I mean, and we handled it, and we got the company on the line and all of that stuff. I want you to just talk about what we should do as agents, and I'll even say as scratch agents, to add that to our process and to prepare for that. So in that type of situation where Mr. and Mrs. Smith is standing on their curb watching their house burning, we can still provide them the best experience possible.
This goes back to planning. And I think you bring a great point, Stephen, in that if you don't have a plan for something like this, you're not going to know what to do. So my suggestion would be, one, gather a list of resources. Gather a list of, sure, you can send them to ALE to figure out a place to go live, but like, you network with a lot of people. This is, one, your time to shine. This is the human connection. This is your way to leverage your network, the people that you know, and be able to come in need for them. So gather a list of all the people that you might need in this scenario. You might need realtors. You might need people to help them find a place. They might need. They're going to need clothes, right? So gather all of this information and have it set aside as like an emergency. This is what we do, and this is how we react. The second thing would be like, you've got to understand this is where the human connection comes in huge, because there's this entire numbness that goes through these people, and everything is blank. You won't remember anything. You don't care about anything. It's being there for them and understanding that this is probably the worst thing that they have ever gone through, if not
Mm-hmm.
one of the. Um, and this is probably more than the regular case of claims, right? But it's being on top of it even more. It's holding their hand a little bit more, because now it's tenfold. That claim stress, that overwhelming, all of the information is tenfold. But I want to go back to one thing real quick. It's like being proactive about it. Teaching and telling your clients that, like, hey, I know this sucks, but like, we've got this app. We're giving you this tool to take a video of your inventory. Do you have 5 minutes in your day? Walk around, take a video of your things. You know what that does? That supports your case. Because if something does happen, here's one extra thing that you have, and you don't have to fight tooth and nail and nickel and dime with these claims adjusters. Because ultimately, what it comes down to, once again, is support. Do you have the support for this? Well, you don't have support if stuff is burnt down. Harsh reality, right? So it's being proactive about it too.
Yeah. So, but I want to dive a little deeper here, and I'm going to continue
Yeah,
just to
yeah,
press on you if you don't mind. Tell us what that exactly conversation should look like. Of said, like, this is not the conversation we talked about of the tree fell in your car. Do you want to get it? A proposal. Like they don't have a place to live. Everyone's freaking out. Worst thing has probably happened in their life. Client calls you right now, Osama, and says that's going on. Like, walk us through what those extra steps should be to make sure we do the best job we can for our client.
yeah. First of all, I think agents have to understand what that process looks like. And if you don't know, obviously, for me, I've got a leg up in the sense that
Yeah.
I know what those first steps look like. It's basically the company will front the money to get clothes and things that they need for necessity. The company will send them to a hotel or this place or whatever it may be. So it's understanding how that process works, so that way you can explain to the client, hey, listen, this is not normal. I can't imagine the feeling that you're going through right now. I know it's a lot, but I want you to understand I am here every single step of the way. And here's what we will do. We'll gather a list of places for you to stay at because right now you obviously can't. Right? Here's the way the insurance process works, but I don't want to dive too deep into it right now because none of it's going to make any sense to you.
That's a
And
big
quite
one.
frankly,
Yeah.
it'll take a little bit before it actually sets in. But right, first things first is I want to make sure that you're okay, your family's okay, your children's okay, and that you've got a place to stay. The next steps are let's gather the most important documentations, the things that we need. And once again, this goes back to understanding the claims process, understanding, hey, you're the client's going to have to fill out all these documentations that explains, and it's going to have to be like notarized, right? So it's like understanding the claim process on that side. It's like, okay, here's what's going to happen. Like it might seem a little weird, it might seem invasive, right? But like you got to understand the company just wants to figure out what happened. More importantly, hey, if they can go after somebody, they want to do that. Again, just as off topic, right? Like we've all seen these lithium ion batteries that have started fires, right? And there's been a lot of it lately, right? And so like that's a subrogation potential. And so it's setting the client up to understand this is what the insurance company is going to do. It might seem unconventional. It might seem proby. It might seem like an interrogation. That's not their role. Their role is to investigate it, to figure out what happened, to see if they can recover somebody. If you don't feel comfortable, talk to us. Let us know what's going on. Hopefully, we can fill in the gaps so that way you don't have to go through that.
Yeah,
So
and
what is
if you've ever had one of these total losses, I've gone through one of them with a client. One of the things the carrier makes you do, I don't know if this is every state or not. This is New York specific. The client of mine had to do an investigation under oath, and they weren't told to bring their own attorney with them. And we actually advised them. I spoke to one of the benefits of being a member of the Big I in New York. I spoke to Tim Dodge, and he said, hey, I'd recommend if you told your client to bring their own attorney with them to the investigation under oath. So that's one thing we did, and it definitely helped in the process. So I don't know if that's every state or not, but just something I wanted to throw in there.
such good stuff?
I was going to say every policy does that.
Okay.
But usually when examinations under oath happen, it's things don't line up. And so that's their way of saying, let's make sure this is all accurate. But to your point, yeah, don't let your client walk in blind.
Yeah. Yep. So I just want to end with this. I wrote down the steps. Go back and listen to everything that Osama said because he literally gave you step by step the entire process of how to handle a claim. I'm going to break it down to you in 7 quick steps. 1, make sure the client's okay, obviously. 2, validate the information, get all the claim details. 3, discuss the policy weaknesses, right? And explain any repercussions of filing a claim, right, that we spoke about before. 4, set the expectation, right, and help them actually file the claim. So Osama said, 24 to 48 hours, that whole conversation. Number 5, email the adjuster, CC the insured. 6, if you want to put a little cherry on top, do the send out card that Steven does with the claims suck, brownies don't. And then 7, if you're feeling frisky, you can have a cross-sell conversation, a few days after the claim and try to address those policy weaknesses. But I mean, you literally have your whole claims process playbook right there, brought to you by Osama.
I don't think it has to be, it doesn't have to be complicated.
No,
and I think we overthink it. The simpler the process, the easier it will be.
But you have to have a process.
And you have to be prepared. I mean, if anything, this has been so good, Osama. Thank you for joining us. But if anything, I hope this is a slap in the face to some scratch agents of oh crap, I haven't even thought about this, right? Because what are we doing? Policy, get them in the door, revenue, get them in the door, renewals, okay, renewal process, we have to build a team, okay, we're going to do that, we're going to grow our agency. I don't think we really think about this, right? Osama came from that world. He obviously thought about that. He's got his decision tree. I've seen it. It's incredible, the claims conversation, where you need to go. But like, this is what we do to shine, right? And having these things prepared, having these things laid out is going to make the world of a difference when you're Stephen Term, when you're going to your friend's house for dinner at 6:30 and someone calls and says, I'm standing on the curb, my house is on fire. If you have this prepared, you can bring that up to remind yourself as the agent of what the steps are we need to follow, right? And then help your client do what everything Sean said in those 7 steps.
And if you have a team, role play with your team.
100%. That's also fantastic. I have a feeling there's going to be a Sound Harbor playbook on this by, let's see, we're recording this at 10:46, so by 11 a.m. we should have a new playbook from Sound Harbor on this. Osama, thank you for joining us for the second time. Everybody remember episode 78 got more into the story of Osama and his agency. Hope everything's going well on that front, Osama. But for somebody who wants to pick your brain on this, I know you're super generous. What's the best way to have them get in touch with you?
Yeah, just reach out to me via email. I kind of cut back on social media, so email is the best way. Osama@insuragency.org.
Awesome. Fantastic. Everybody, that's another episode of the Scratch Agency Podcast. Thanks for joining us. Do us a favor, like the show, share the show, and subscribe. But most importantly, remember to dig down deep, believe in yourself, and own your own future. We'll see you next week. Take care.